To speak to him in half an hour. But first, John Sweeney is with me, investigative journalist, well known to you, I'm sure, and author of Murder in the Gulag, the explosive account of how Putin poisoned Alexei Navalny, an important name to remember this week, Alexei Navalny, as well as yours, John. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Sheila. Yes, Navalny was poisoned pretty much a year ago, and his widow, Navalnaya, gave an incredibly powerful and very emotional speech to the Munich Security Conference. And it just feels like all of that with crocodile tears and hot air, if all the rest of the West goes along with what Donald Trump and his slick-haired Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, if what they say is going to turn out to be true.
And the thing is, it's probably no surprise to anybody that Hegseth said yesterday, look, America is looking to China, it's looking to its own borders. You know, that kind of stuff has been rumbling for a while. But is what they're suggesting likely to happen in your view? Is there still a lot to play for there?
Oh, hey, come on, ask me the easy one, Sheila.
Let's chew the cud on it, John. You don't have to be right.
It's very, very hard. So I did Russian at school, and I went to LSE in '77, and my professor of Russian politics was a guy called Leonid Shapiro, who said that as a small boy, I remember both Russian revolutions, the one in February and the one in October. The February one was exciting. By the time the October one came along, we found revolutions boring, and we carried on playing cowboy and Indians. So I've been a kind of criminologist for a long, long time, maybe since '77. Mar-a-Lagoology is way harder, because Trump says something, or one of his creatures says something, and then he unsays it. So, for example, in your introduction, you've just said the peace talks are going to start at the Munich Security Conference, and the Russians aren't invited because they're no part of European security. They're the enemy. And the Russians aren't there. And so the Russians, in your very kind of lead up to this, you're saying, well, Trump's invited the Russians, and the Russians are saying, well, we're not coming because we haven't
be there. Yeah.
And so there is. So that's a kind of boring start of it. But it's. I mean, let's do a little bit of history here. Earlier you were saying that a lot of your listeners seem to think that Putin's kind of okay and what he's been doing in Ukraine is okay. Well, let's just start with the people who are British who've been killed. Right, the first one is Alexander Litvinenko. Now, he was Russian, a former KGB colonel, but he comes to Britain and he gets a British passport. He's a naturalised British citizen when he's poisoned with polonium-210, manufactured in Russia, no question. The person responsible for me, no question, Vladimir Putin. Then Putin doesn't like people who used to be in the Russian secret state and then switch. And so what happened was he set out with his murderers to poison Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. Thank God Skripal and his daughter survived, but a perfectly innocent Wiltshire lass, Dawn Sturgis. Tragically, the poison bottle ended up on her wrists because she thought it was a present from her boyfriend. He didn't know either, and she died of the Novichok. Then we've got the British. 298 people died in MH17. This is the Boeing passenger jet, Air Malaysia, flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. There were 10 Britons on that plane, and I went to the crash site. So I would like to say to some, the people who call in and say, Putin is just doing this and that. No, he's not. He's a murderer at scale. And my book, the first, I've written 3 books in the last 3 years or so, but the first one, Killer in the Kremlin, sets out all the people who've been poisoned or fallen out of windows or been shot. Personally, I know 4 Russian critics of Putin, and they are Anna Politkovskaya, Natasha Estemirova, Boris Nemtsov, and Alexei Navalny.
All dead.
In order, poisoned, then shot, poisoned, recovered, poisoned, dead. So listen, folks, I mean, there's a pattern there. My latest book is called Murderer in the Gulag, How Putin Poisoned Navalny. There's a clue in the name, folks. So if Trump's big picture is he's looking and standing up to China, then, I mean, it's foolish to think you can trust Vladimir Putin as far as you can throw him. You just can't. So the idea that it's okay to kind of do some kind of deal with Putin because it'll help you against the Chinese for the big fight, that's foolish because he's utterly untrustworthy.
What?
And sorry,
I was going to say,
going on.
No, you're not going on at all. It's interesting. Why do you think Donald Trump appears anyway to be as relaxed as some of those callers I've alluded to about Putin? What is he faking it? Does Putin have something on him? What's going on, do you think? Another easy one.
It's only, I suppose, it's not really more, but it feels like it. That's another hard one. So my friend Christopher Steele, and we've become friends since he wrote this report, which was never meant to be public, but it turned out to be the Steele dossier. And Chris Steele, who's a former officer in MI6, in fact, the former head of the Russian department at MI6, believes that the Russians have got sexual compromise on Donald Trump. So one view, Chris's view, is that the reason why Trump is behaving in this way is because he's afraid of something nasty coming out about him. Now, we're all men and women of the world. Everybody listens to LBCR anyway. We understand, don't we, that of course Trump's a big shagger. Who cares? There's nothing the Russians will have on. The Russian secret police know what they're doing. If they've got something on him, it'll be nasty and dark, and he won't want it out there. So that's one school of thought. The second is, and by the way, I drink with Chris, and I drink vodka martinis, and he always orders them with the following phrase, shaken, not stirred. So pretty much I agree with Chris. The second view is that Trump is in awe of and jealous of and admires Putin's grip on power and his ability. So, for example, if somebody irritating comes along like Alexei Navalny and says, listen, I want to give you a run for your money, I want to stand against you in a democratic election. Okay, well, let's have you poisoned and then get him off the board. And so I think that is also true, that Trump admires people like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un.
He would rather not be president in a system like the one he's in, which has supposedly lots of checks and balances against dictators.
Yes, it still does. But every single caller who sympathises with Putin must understand, mustn't they, that nothing like LBC does exist in Putin's Russia. Mm. Nobody. I mean, the point is, you're not allowed to think to say what you think.
Well, there's the famous case, isn't there, of a young woman holding a blank placard with nothing on it, sitting on a step and being arrested. Mm.
Yes. So, by the way, and the third possibility is that Trump's a fool and doesn't understand what he's dealing with here. And Putin and the people around him have very cunningly managed to trap him. And by the way, I also think that's possible. But there is a very, very simple thing, and this is one of the things which makes me so angry, is my dad was a ship's engineer in the Battle of the Atlantic, and so many of his friends died fighting the Nazis. And it's as if everybody's forgotten that. Mm. The reason my dad and all the brave men and women from Britain and around the world, the Commonwealth and the Americans, eventually, we all went to war against the Nazis, was on a simple principle that you cannot invade another country and hope to steal their land. And that's a very, very big principle. And there are cenotaphs up and down our wonderful country honouring the dead. Please don't forget that. I mean, so that's the principle.
Actually,
that is why...
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Battle of the Atlantic, actually, because was it last September or the summer before? Forgive me, I can't remember. There was a new memorial erected, a beautiful memorial erected in front of St Nicholas's Church in Liverpool, looking out to the River Mersey for those people, because it was basically organised at the Western Approaches in Liverpool, wasn't it, the Battle of the Atlantic? And it's so easy to forget how significant that was for years in the war to actually keep Britain fed as much as anything else. We'd have starved to death without it in Britain, wouldn't we?
Yes, and we were, and when my dad's convoy got to Iceland, the Royal Navy would go back to Britain, and he was then they were then looked after by the Royal Canadian Navy. And when Trump starts talking about taking over Canada and sanctions against Canada, I have to say I immediately bought. I went online and I bought a bottle of Canadian whiskey and some Canadian maple syrup.
Why am I not surprised? Why am I not surprised? John, I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. And let me just repeat the title of your book as well. Murder in the Gulag, the latest book that John has written, the explosive account of how Putin poisoned Alexei Navalny. Thank you very much indeed, John. John Sweeney giving us some food for thought there. Lots of you calling in already. It's 1:17.
This is